She was a mere adolescent who was awaiting her flight when airport personnel singled her out, interrogated her in a manner that was reminiscent of a criminal, and attempted to evict her. However, they came to the realization that they had made a tremendous error upon the arrival of her father. Aaliyah Garrison positioned herself in the rigid plastic chair adjacent to her gate at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport, pulling her hoodie over her head. Her phone screen was illuminated as she casually browsed through messages, her backpack resting between her feet. She was eager to return home, despite her fatigue, as it was only a few hours away. The direct flight was reserved by her mother several weeks prior, and she had conducted a thorough confirmation process as is customary. Aaliyah had previously traveled independently, and she believed that this would be no different. The crowd collectively groaned as a crackling voice over the intercom proclaimed a flight delay. She let out a sigh as she adjusted the volume on her headphones. She then observed an elderly woman who was a few seats away, stealing glimpses at her. Not the typical casual type, the kind that persisted for an unexpectedly long time. Aaliyah disregarded it. Many individuals observed the event, but something about the woman's demeanor caused her to feel uneasy. Minutes later, a middle-aged airport employee with a rigid posture approached her in a uniform. As he halted in front of her, she removed one of her earbuds. "Pardon me, madam. May I request to view your boarding pass?" Aaliyah blinks. "Certainly." She handed it over after digging into her windbreaker pocket. He briefly examined it, repeatedly turning it over as if there were an issue. "Are you traveling independently?" She agreed. "Yes, I frequently engage in this activity." The individual's lips were pursed. He returned the boarding permit without making any movement. "I require a copy of your identification as well." Aaliyah hesitated. No one else in her vicinity was being questioned. She observed that no one else was being requested to provide identification, including families, professionals, and couples. She inquired, "Is there an issue?" as she extracted her wallet from her purse. He responded, "Regular security inspection. I am merely verifying the information." She presented him with her school identification card, which was the sole document she owned. Before he resumed speaking, he scarcely glanced at it. "Where are your parents?" Aaliyah expressed her dissatisfaction. "I am 16 years old, therefore my parents are unnecessary." The atmosphere was altered. It was energized and tense. Aaliyah was not naive. She was aware of the situation, but she also recognized that it would be unwise to cause a disturbance. The man nodded, and said, "That's all right. Please remain in this location for a brief period." She clenched her phone even more tightly as he departed. The woman who had been gazing at the other staff member earlier was now murmuring to her. The unease in Aaliyah's stomach began to tighten. After a brief period, 2 additional airport employees arrived, a tall, wiry man in a TSA uniform, and a short woman with an insignia attached to her blazer. The woman inquired, her eyes alight, "Miss Garrison?" "Yeah, would you be willing to accompany us for a brief period?" Aaliyah's pulse beat rapidly. She briefly examined her phone, contemplating whether or not to contact her father, but ultimately declined. This must have been an error. "Why?" she inquired, endeavoring to maintain her composure. The TSA officer informed the passenger that their ticket had been highlighted for a security check. His tone was gentle, but his demeanor was not. Aaliyah stood, grasping the straps of her knapsack. "What is the reason for the flag?" The woman's smile was stiff and rehearsed. "This is a routine screening. There is no need for concern." Aaliyah briefly examined the surroundings. No other individuals were taken aside. She pursued them, her heart rate increasing. The rumors, staring, the fact that no other individuals had been randomly selected. She was beginning to comprehend that this was not about security. Rather, it was about her. However, the subsequent events would serve as irrefutable evidence. Aaliyah's heart pounded heavier with each stride as she followed the 2 employees down the terminal, her steps rapid and light. The TSA officer directed her to a small screening area, which was one of those side chambers designated for supplementary inspections. A stocky man was leaning against the desk, arms crossed, and the space was largely vacant, with the exception of another agent. The woman in the blazer signaled for her to halt just inside the doorway. "Please place your bag on the ground," she instructed. Aaliyah hesitated, before complying with the directive. "I am unable to comprehend it," she stated. endeavoring to maintain a steady tone. I have already cleared security. Eyeing her up and down, the stocky male pushed off the desk. We simply need to pose a few inquiries. To which destination are you traveling? Indianapolis. From whom did you purchase your ticket? My mother. The woman's cranium was inclined. And you are traveling independently? Aaliyah expressed her dissatisfaction. Yes, as I previously stated. The stocky male and the TSA officer exchanged glances. Do you possess a return ticket? I do not reside there. The woman wrote something on a clipboard. The question is, do you have family in Phoenix? Aaliyah crossed her arms and exhaled. My uncle, but I was in attendance at a basketball camp. What is the significance of this? The inquiry was disregarded by the woman. For what duration were you in Phoenix? Aaliyah experienced a sensation of warmth in her bosom. This was not typical. She had previously flown independently on numerous occasions, with the same airline and procedure, but she had never been separated in this manner. Her fingertips curled around the strap of her bag. She murmured under her breath, "This is absurd." The corpulent individual advanced. "Excuse me." She clenched her mandible, and then slowly exhaled. "I am simply unable to comprehend the reason for the questioning." The woman eventually gazed into her own eyes. "Your ticket was flagged. This is a common occurrence." Aaliyah sneered. "To whom?" "Because I do not observe any other individuals being impeded." Silence. Another stride was taken by the corpulent individual. "Miss, are you demonstrating a lack of cooperation?" Aaliyah's stomach sank. "No, I simply, subsequently we recommend that you respond to the inquiries without apprehension." He interrupted, his voice resonating. She suppressed her fury, despite the fact that her complexion was scorched. "That is satisfactory." The clipboard was touched by the woman. "Have you ever been subjected to questioning by airport security?" Aaliyah's fingertips trembled. "No." "Have you ever encountered any difficulties with law enforcement?" "What?" No. Woman nodded, and jotted down another observation. "Do you have any cash on you?" "What?" Aaliyah gazed at her in bewilderment. Why would that even be? She halted herself, inhaling through her nostril. "No, I possess my debit card." The woman again jotted something. "All right. Please proceed to this location." Aaliyah's breath was seized. "Excuse me. What is the reason?" "We must inspect your luggage." "You have already scanned it," she replied. The TSA officer became tense. "Are you declining to undergo a bag search?" Aaliyah's pulse pounded in her ears as she gazed at them. They would intensify their pressure if she declined. They would conduct a search regardless of whether she responded affirmatively. She retreated. The corpulent individual reached for his radio. "We may require further support in this area." Aaliyah's ribcage contracted. Her voice rose as she inquired, "For what?" "I have not taken any action." After raising her hand, the woman's smile was as thin as paper. "There is no need for concern if there is nothing to conceal." Aaliyah's vision became hazy due to her frustration. She was incredulous that this was transpiring. She pushed her purse toward them after unzipping it. "Proceed." A charger, a half-empty pack of Skittles, her clothes, and her journal were all examined by the stocky man. Then, as if anticipating something else, he flipped the bag upside down, touched the bottom, and shook it. A pen rolled onto the table. That concluded the matter. He exchanged another gaze with the TSA officer. The woman finally replied, "All right. You are permitted to retrieve it." Aaliyah grasped her possessions and reinserted them into her bag with trembling hands. Subsequently, the chamber was once more penetrated by the woman's voice. "One final item. Position yourself against the wall." Aaliyah's stomach contracted. "Why?" The woman beamed. "Your photograph is required for documentation purposes." That concluded the matter. Her fingertips penetrated the fabric of her hoodie. "No," she replied. The expression of the corpulent man became more somber. "Miss." "No," she abruptly replied, retracing her steps. "This is excessive. Security to Terminal 4, secondary screening area." The corpulent man announced into his radio. Aaliyah's palms were trembling. They were treating her as if she were a criminal, despite the fact that she had committed no offenses. She was aware that the situation was about to worsen significantly upon the arrival of security. However, She was unaware of the extent to which they were prepared to go. As she observed the security officer enter the room, Aaliyah's pulse reverberated in her ears. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had a hardened visage that appeared to have been the scene of decades of airport disputes. His badge reflected the harsh overhead lighting, and his uniform was crisp. "What is the matter?" he inquired, his gaze alternating between Aaliyah and the TSA agents. The corpulent agent extended his hand toward her. "She is declining to adhere to conventional security protocols." Aaliyah's mandible contracted. "That is inaccurate." The individual in the blazer crossed her arms. "We requested a straightforward photograph for documentation, and she is obstructing the process." Aaliyah felt her grasp become increasingly tighten around the strap of her backpack. "I should not be obligated to perform this task. I have committed no infractions." The security officer's weight was repositioned as he exhaled through his nostrils. "Miss, if they request a photograph, simply take the photo and proceed." Aaliyah shook her head. "I should not be required to be on my way. I should be at my gate, waiting for my aircraft, just like everyone else." The room's tension intensified. The TSA officer's voice diminished by an octave. "Either you comply, or we escalate this matter." Aaliyah's breath was seized. "Elevate to what?" "Arresting me for sitting at my gate." The woman impatiently clicked her stylus. "Miss Garrison, you are inciting a disturbance." Aaliyah emitted a piercing chuckle. "Why are you bringing me into this situation?" "I did not do anything." The corpulent agent advanced toward her. "You must remain composed." Aaliyah's hands began to shake once more, but this time it was not due to terror. It was anger. She peered toward the open doorway, inquiring as to whether anyone outside could hear this. Passengers passed by, unaware. Will anyone assist her if she screams? Alternatively, would they simply observe the image that these individuals desired? An adolescent who was uncooperative and causing trouble. The security officer rubbed his temple as he exhaled. "Look, child, if you refuse to cooperate, we will be compelled to remove you from the airport." Aaliyah's stomach sank. "What?" the stocky agent stated matter-of-factly. "You pose a security risk." Her respiration was strained. "Am I a security risk? I am a 16-year-old girl who is attempting to reach her home." The individual in the blazer merely shrugged. "That is no longer our concern." The security officer stepped aside and gestured toward the door. "Come on, we will lead you out." Aaliyah's legs appeared to be immobilized. Was this a genuine occurrence? She coerced herself to take a breath. "I would like to contact my father." The corpulent individual sneered. "That is superfluous." Aaliyah abruptly exclaimed, removing her phone from her pocket. "It's not," she declared. The female reached forward. "Miss, please dispose of that." Before they could intervene, Aaliyah retreated and pressed the call button with her thumb. Her ears were filled with a deafening sound, and her heart was pounding in her chest. A single ring. Two. Then Aaliyah. Her father's voice was composed and steady, the exact opposite of how she was feeling at the moment. She exhaled with trembling. "Dad, I require your assistance immediately." A hush descended upon the chamber. "What is the matter?" His voice immediately became more incisive. Aaliyah marginally retracted her gaze from the agents. "They are forcibly removing me from the airport." The other end was silent, and then a low and firm question was uttered. "Where are you?" "A security room located in close proximity to Terminal 4. The stocky man moved forward, causing a chair to scrape against the floor. "Miss, please terminate the call." Aaliyah turned, grasping the phone like a lifeline. "No, you cannot simply dismiss me without providing me with an explanation." Her father's voice was so confident and unwavering that she experienced a fleeting moment of optimism for the first time since the incident had commenced. "I'm on my way," he replied. The security officer exhaled. "We will be required to contact the airport police if she refuses to depart." Aaliyah's respiration was strained. Her father must have heard, as his voice was unwavering and piercing. "Do not move. Do not speak another word. I will be there in 5 minutes." Suddenly everything changed. The security officer hesitated, his confidence ebbing and flowing. The TSA Agents exchanged apprehensive glances. They had presumed that she was unaccompanied. They had made the assumption that no one was pursuing her. However, they were mistaken. They were going to regret everything when her father arrived. The subsequent 5 minutes seemed to last an eternity. Aaliyah's arms were crossed as she stood, her phone still in her grasp. The tension in the room had only intensified. Despite the fact that the security officer and the TSA agents had ceased conversing, they were awaiting much like she was. Aaliyah forced herself to inhale forcefully. She had never been more relieved to hear her father's voice, but she was aware of the impending event. Terrence Garrison was not your typical father. He was a prominent civil rights attorney, and if these individuals believed they could intimidate her, they were unaware of the formidable opponent they were about to encounter. Outside the room, the terminal's muffled sounds persisted, including the crackling of announcements over the intercom, the rolling of luggage wheels, and the sound of footfall. It all felt surreal, as if she were ensnared in an alternate reality in which her mere presence in an airport could result in her expulsion. Subsequently, there was substantial footfall, not hurried, not in a state of panic, intentional. The agent's gaze darted toward the door as he shifted. Stepping inside was a tall, broad-shouldered man dressed in a navy blue suit. His expression was unreadable, and his salt and pepper beard was meticulously trimmed. However, his eyes were still visible. He appraised the room in a matter of seconds, his eyes being acute. Terrence Garrison had arrived. The room experienced a change. The security officer made an effort to correct himself. The clipboard was concealed beneath the arm of the woman in the blazer. Aaliyah inhaled. "Father." Terrence briefly glanced at her before redirecting his attention to the security officer. "Who occupies this position?" The officer advanced. "Sir, this is a restricted area." "Not anymore," Terrence replied with a composed demeanor. He produced his smartphone and elevated it to his eye. "I have just spoken with the general counsel of the airport. They are aware that I am present. Please have someone provide an explanation for the detention and threat of removal of my daughter." The woman in the blazer cleared her voice. "Sir," Terrence interrupted. "What is your name?" She hesitated. "I am employed by the airport administration," said Patricia Dawson. He nodded before turning to the TSA officer. "And you?" The individual ingested the substance. "James Wilcox." Terrence advanced gradually. "James." "Patricia. My daughter was at her gate, conducting herself as she normally would, when you forcibly dragged her into this room. You subsequently searched her bag, interrogated her without justification, and threatened to detain her from the airport. Consequently, I must once more inquire as to why." No one spoke. Aaliyah crossed her arms. She desired to witness them publicly, admit that they surmised that she was suspect due to her appearance. The agent's larynx was cleared by the stocky individual. An additional screening was initiated for her ticket. Terrence raised his eyebrows. "Really? Additionally, how many other passengers were flagged on that flight?" Silence.
He grinned.
"That was my initial impression." Patricia shifted uneasily. "Sir, this was standard procedure." "No, it was not." Terrence's voice grew increasingly perilous as it descended. "You treated her like a criminal, harassed her, and singled her out. Wilcox assumed responsibility. We adhered to the security protocols." "No," Terrence abruptly replied. "You subjected them to abuse." The chamber was devoid of any sound. Then gradually he extracted a card from his wallet. He positioned it on the desk that was situated between them. "My office will be submitting a formal complaint to the TSA and the airport administration. If necessary, we will pursue legal action for unlawful detention and racial discrimination." Aaliyah's spirit swelled. Patricia ingested. "Sir, Terrence tucked his phone into his pocket and said, "Save it. Your regret is solely due to my attendance." His expression softened as he turned to Aaliyah. "Are you feeling well?" Although she was unable to communicate due to the lump in her throat, she nodded. Before returning his gaze to the group, he placed a reassuring palm on her shoulder. He stated, "You will personally accompany her to her gate, and you are going to offer an apology." Wilcox and Patricia exchanged anxious glances. The security officer exhaled slowly.
Understood. Shaking. Aaliyah exhaled. She was no longer apprehensive, as they were now the ones in a state of panic. However, the subsequent events would only serve to exacerbate their regret. The passage back to the gate was ominously silent. Aaliyah experienced the weight of each stare as the security officer, Patricia and Wilcox followed her and her father. The individuals who had previously dragged her from her seat now appeared to be desiring to vanish. Terrence's presence was as solid as a masonry wall as he walked alongside her. He did not need to elevate his voice or make accusations. His silence was sufficient to cause them to feel uneasy. Aaliyah's seat was still vacant when they arrived at the gate. Her purse was still in the same spot where she had left it, as if nothing had happened. However, everything had already been done. Terrence folded his arms as he turned. Patricia shifted uncomfortably under his gaze as she cleared her throat. "We regret any inconvenience this may have caused, Miss Garrison." Aaliyah raised her eyebrows. "That's it." Wilcox inhaled. "We apologize for the confusion." Terrence's laughter was abrupt. "Misunderstanding. I am of the opinion that you comprehended your actions with precision." Patricia's hands trembled at her sides. "Sir, Terrence interrupted, his head slightly tilted. "Do you have children?" She hesitated. "Yes. Consider that this was your child," he said, his voice low but resonant with significance. "Consider the possibility of them being treated as criminals without justification. Consider the fear and humiliation they endure. Would the statement 'we apologize for the misunderstanding' suffice for you?" She averted her gaze. Aaliyah observed, her chest constricting as the reality of the situation finally dawned on them. It is possible that they had previously implemented this approach, disregarded an individual who bore a resemblance to her, assumed the worst. It was justified as a matter of protocol. However, this time, they were being held accountable. The murmurs that enveloped them intensified. Other passengers had begun to pay heed. Some individuals may have observed Aaliyah being taken away at an earlier time. Her father stood firm in the center of the scene, and they were now witnessing her return, flanked by security. Terrence briefly examined the terminal before returning his attention to the personnel. "Do you know who I am?" Patricia's expression became more tense. "Yes, sir." "That is satisfactory. It is evident that this is not the conclusion." Wilcox shifted on his feet. "Sir, if you are proposing..." Terrence's voice was composed and tranquil as he stated, "I am not making any recommendations. I am informing you that a formal complaint will be filed, and an investigation will be conducted. When the public learns of this, you will be required to account for each and every decision you made today." Patricia's complexion became paler. Aaliyah could now discern it, the gradual dawning of the realization. The headlines, counter-reaction, the potential loss of their employment. Additionally, they appeared anxious for the first time. However, Terrence was not yet finished. He directed his attention to the security officer. "I require a written report that outlines the precise reason for my daughter's detention, as well as the names of all parties involved, prior to her departure." The man's head cocked slightly. "I will promptly forward it to you." Aaliyah's fingers continued to tremble as she tightened her grasp on her backpack. In that security room, she had experienced an overwhelming sense of insignificance and powerlessness. However, as she stood here and observed them strive to rectify their actions, she experienced an entirely distinct sensation. She experienced the sensation of being detected. Patricia's lips were pressed together as she straightened. "Miss Garrison, we sincerely..." Aaliyah interjected. "Retain it." Their vacuous apologies did not pique her interest. "No, not at this time. Never." Terrence examined his wristwatch. "You have squandered an adequate amount of her time. Her flight is scheduled to depart in 10 minutes. With that he turned and directed Aaliyah back to her seat. The staff remained motionless, uncertain as to whether to remain or depart. They were aware that the balance of power had changed. Terrence exhaled as he leaned against the seat beside Aaliyah as she seated down. "Are you feeling well?" She slowly nodded. "Yes, I believe so." She was uncertain as to whether she truly intended to convey her sentiment. She continued to feel the burden of the events that had transpired. However, she was relieved that she no longer had to transport it alone. This was no longer solely about her, and the entire world would shortly be aware of it. Aaliyah remained seated, clutching her phone as her father typed something on his computer. She was acutely aware of his actions. This was never going to remain in the diminutive security room. It was not intended to remain within the confines of this airport. And as soon as he pressed the send button, it did not. His statement was uploaded to the website of his legal firm within minutes. A comprehensive account of the events was disseminated on social media. Names are included. Absence of ornamentation. Nothing but the truth. As Aaliyah refreshed her screen, her innards twisted. The comments were already flooding in. Unbelievable. This occurs far too frequently. Sue them. They are entitled to it. This could have been my daughter. Her thorax contracted. It was a surreal experience to observe the reactions of strangers to an event that she had recently experienced. She briefly observed her father. Do you believe that this will actually result in any changes? Terence folded his palms and exhaled. It has already occurred. Aaliyah received a small knowing gesture from a woman who had turned in her seat a few rows in advance. As he passed, a man peered at Terence and then at Aaliyah, his expression devoid of meaning. She was uncertain as to whether they had observed the post or had simply overheard the earlier confrontation. But she abruptly felt as though she was no longer invisible. Crackling emanated from the intercom. Flight 287 to Indianapolis is currently boarding. Terence adjusted his suit jacket as he stood. Come on, child. It is time to return home. Aaliyah stood up and retrieved her luggage. But as she advanced toward the boarding line, Patricia Wilcox and the security officer conversed in a low voice in the background. Their postures were rigid, and their features were tense. They were aware of the impending events. It was presumed that she would simply retreat. They had made an incorrect assumption. Aaliyah occupied the window position as she boarded her flight. She exhaled profoundly as she rested her forehead against the cool glass. She relived the entire incident in her mind, from the moment the staff member requested her identification to the manner in which they searched her bag as if they anticipated something dropping out. She also considered pushing her because they believed no one would notice. However, someone did. Additionally, this was no longer solely about her. Her father had previously recounted tales of cases he had prosecuted, and families he had advocated for. She had consistently listened and comprehended in an abstract manner. However, she had already experienced it. She retrieved her phone and entered the following. I was humiliated today, but I was not the only one. She hesitated briefly before selecting post. The story had been shared more than 10,000 times by the time she arrived. Individuals were observing. Individuals are engaged in observing. This time, there would be repercussions, as reticence was no longer an option. Stories such as Aaliyah's occur more frequently than we are aware, and they frequently go unacknowledged. However, when we speak up and refuse to remain mute, changes begin to occur. So, if you have ever experienced injustice or been made to feel as though you do not belong, do not remain mute. Speak up, hold them accountable. Your voice is significant, and if this narrative resonated with you, be sure to subscribe for additional content, as these are the stories that require telling.